Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural with our legal experts, Edward Pichado Esquire, Royce Russell Esquire, and myself, Dr. Stacey N.C. Grant. So you're hearing my voice today, but you may not be able to see my face because I'm in the mobile studio. But we are excited to be back with you as we are winding out this month of March, Women's History Month. But before we get started, let's go ahead and have our co-host greet you. Over to you, Señor Pichado. ¿Cómo está?
Oh, muy bien, gracias. Buena tarde, mi gente. Hello, good afternoon, my people. Hope all is well. Welcome to the show this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I believe that you're going to find the information, as usual, to be educational and spiritually fulfilling. So I hope you stay tuned because I think you're going to benefit from this show.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Russell, over to you.
Yes, everybody, welcome to the show. Hopefully you enjoy it and hopefully you'll find it informative because information is the key. So let's rock and roll.
Awesome. And hey, Anthony, thank you for tuning in and appreciate you being here. So, something that is being talked about quite a bit on every news channel, social media. I mean, I don't know where it's not being talked
Barbershop,
about.
playground, grammar
Playground,
school, you name it.
everywhere. Oh my
Anywhere,
goodness.
anywhere.
Everywhere for real. What the what? But I think that this article that our co host found was definitely very thorough in looking at all sides of what happened. And when we talk about where the legal meets the culture, before we get into the details of what happened, should he be concerned about anything else legally as a result of his actions?
Absolutely. I had a friend actually send me a report. I don't know if it was true or not about the sheriff's department, coming near or sitting in front of the home. The bottom line here is that Mr. Will
The
Smith
home of
committed
whom? Though? At the home of whom? Because you sitting in the home in front of home of Chris Rock because you're afraid that something's going to happen to Chris, or a home of Will Smith because they're getting ready to make the arrest.
Well, I heard it was Will Smith.
Retaliation with the home
I heard it was Will Smith. Now, whether or not they're sitting there for protection or not is a whole nother story. I just wanted to put that out there and then say that Mr. Will Smith committed a crime, okay? It was witnessed. It was recorded by video. The fact that the LA County, PD, police department, and/or sheriff department, both law enforcement entities, whether they decided to handle this in a manner by which they're going by whether or not the victim in this case, Chris Rock, decides to file a police report, and if he declines to file one or doesn't file one within the applicable statute of limitations, they have decided that they're not going to send that over to the LA County District Attorney's Office and have that chief law enforcement officer of that county file a criminal complaint against Will Smith. The way they're handling it is not conclusive or dispositive, if you will, as to the issue of whether or not something could happen. Something could clearly happen. The DA's office, the DA may say, you know what? I don't care if he's filed a police report or not. We're going to file a criminal complaint based on what was witnessed. Okay, they can do that. They do it. They use their most of the time this issue comes up during a domestic violence case, right? And I'm going to let my co-host Royce Russell chime in right here on that part because, how is it that police departments all around the country decide that they're going to move forward with prosecutions even though the victim no longer wants the perpetrator or the suspect or the person who is quote unquote committed the crime, that they don't want the case to move forward? What normally happens there, my brother?
Well, first of all, let me say a couple of things. I think the answer is within what Will Smith said. Can you imagine that the answer to your question is exactly within the statement that Will Smith gave when he went and accepted his award. He said, love makes you do crazy things. That's why the DA's office implemented and the police departments implemented the right to move forward when the victim herself or himself in a domestic violence setting does not want to move forward, because love will make you do crazy things. Love will make you say, you know what, I don't want to proceed, even though I call 911 and my partner was choking me at the time, or I have bruises and my kids are scared to come home, but I'm in love with this person. So I do the crazy thing by not pressing charges, even though I brought the police to the scene. You know, here's the cultural and here's the legal, all wrapped up in something that we saw in an entertainment venue. The legal is, as you said, there's a crime, assault. Hey, the statute of limitations is not 5 days, is not 3 days when it comes down to the criminal charge of assault. You have anywhere between a year to 5 years to move on that. Battery, same thing. You have a year to 5 years to move on that. It might be a simple battery. It might be a violation in some states. It might be a misdemeanor in other states. But the reality is that a crime did exist, and the proof is in the tape. The tape will testify for everyone. It speaks for itself. As they say, re ipsa loquitur, right? It is what it is. It happened. We see it. We don't even have to give an excuse around it. We don't even need any narrative. The
We
brick
don't need
fell,
a witness.
That's right. We don't need a witness. The brick fell from the sky, hit me in my head. Well, the brick must be loose. We don't need scientists to tell us that. And so here we are. We have this assault, this crime taking place. As you said, Chris Rock and the LAPD, they don't, they decided they don't want to do anything. That does not mean that the district attorney's office can apply what has been applied in many domestic violence cases, because love will make you do crazy things and move forward. Now, are these rich people playing in the dirt sand? Yeah, in the sandbox? Yeah, but you can make an example of what goes on, because I've seen worse on the social economic ladder where there was just a misunderstanding, whether domestic or otherwise, and it needs to be resolved peacefully. And it's not. It's resolved criminally, or it's resolved in family court, or it's escalated. And we all know that certain people get certain breaks and certain people don't get the breaks. And I don't care how much we talk today, what Kareem published, what any comedian, Cedric Entertainer, going to say on the stage, or any other commentator that wants to deal with this issue, they're not going to do anything. We understand and know this, that that's not going to happen, because then you have lines and people marching saying that this wouldn't happen to Jerry Seinfeld if Charleston Heston or one of the other actors came up and slapped him. They wouldn't do. If the parties don't want to proceed, why make the arrest? So you're right in that sweet spot where if you do something which you're within the law to do, what kind of bonfires is that going to set off in one community? Because then the issue becomes less about what actually happened and more about the disparity of treatment between Black folks. And that's a powder keg right there, right? And so they'll probably do nothing. What I'm more fearful of and for is the guy who's doing the comedy routine down at Caroline's or at Nipsey's or at Lenox Lounge or wherever they may be doing their comic strip, and somebody decides like, oh, you offended me, so I'm gonna jump up here and knock you to heaven's high waters, and there's no cameras and there's no protection.
Well, I think one of the reasons why I felt like this article should be put up for the audience is I welcome the audience to really read it, because it takes Kareem, the esteemed Kareem Abdul-Jabbar offers a very critical rendering and opinion on what occurred, and it mainly focuses on the damage that this does to women. Actually, the idea that a woman can't defend herself against words is very powerful. There are parts of the world where women are not allowed to walk the streets on their own. They aren't allowed to drive cars. They aren't allowed
to reveal their faces. They're not allowed to reveal their faces to protect men. or walk in front
Exactly.
of men.
So the cultural impact of what occurred is much greater than what a lot of people are actually considering. Even some women like Tiffany Haddish. This idea that you have to protect what quote unquote. Let's face it. Jada Pickett Smith is one of the most powerful women in the country, if not the world, and certainly in the Black community. She is wealthy. She is influential. She is well known. The idea that a woman like that needs a man to get up and slap another man over words is kind of interesting when you think about it. And where does this put women? There was a time in this country where a woman couldn't purchase property on her own and needed a man to do that on her behalf. So before a lot of women think about this as being, oh, how sweet this man is defending this woman's honor, and not to say that, say, if a woman is attacked physically, that you as a man aren't expected to stand up and protect that woman, any woman, even if it's not your woman in particular. We're not talking about that here. What we're talking about is we're talking about words, not to mention this idea of violence, right, between two Black men, not to mention the example that this sets for younger Black men, even his own son, who appeared to have justified the act. All of these things have very serious reverberations, and I welcome the audience to read. It's not very long. I would imagine that you're probably going to be able to get through this in about 2 minutes at most. But very, very, very thoughtful. And I want to conclude by speaking for Kareem and saying that at the very end, he wishes no ill will or consequences to Will Smith. Okay, he doesn't. He doesn't want him prosecuted. He doesn't want him to lose his Oscar, which he worked hard for. All those things. We're not wishing him ill. We don't want him to now be thrown in jail, especially in terms of us here on this show when we talk about the crime and all that. A crime was committed. Not that we're saying, oh yeah, go and arrest him. He needs to be arrested. That's not what we're saying here. Well, this is more so a cautionary tale for the guy who comes into our office and thinks that because his girlfriend doesn't want to press charges, that the prosecution doesn't have the right to continue with the prosecution as a chief law enforcement officer. People need to, understand that this is, as my colleague Royce mentioned, this has a privileged edge to it in terms of, how this is being treated. And you're not to make the mistake of thinking that you are in the same league if you encounter some sort of DV situation where you're like, well, the victim doesn't want to prosecute. No, this is being treated in a way where it's reflective of something other than what the law allows.
We can never lose sight of the cultural part that we're dealing with here. And the cultural part is this: cultural and social economics are tied hand to hand, right? And so we'll take the example: Caucasian white male can argue with a police officer over a ticket. You can do so too, but for every action there's a reaction, right? And so you need to understand place and time. Someone that lives in the projects is someone middle class, lower class on the social economic status may not get the privileges that you see based upon this economic status of Will Smith, Jada Pickett, and Chris Rock. That's number one. Number two, I want to make sure that we don't box ourselves in what we're saying here, because we're very mindful that we want to break the chains to thinking that Black folks are monolithic, that there's one leader, that there's one voice, right? Yes, I agree with what my co-host has said in a variety of ways, but I want to make sure that we understand that everybody's not the same, right? As strong as she could be, as strong as she want to be, as strong as people think that she is, who's to say that she actually is? That's number one. Number two, because this happened, this is not a reflection, and we should rebel against that. This is a reflection of how Black people act. Any reflection of that violence comes first. Any reflection that we're more macho than we need to be, or whoever made the requirement of what degree of manhood or manliness you're supposed to show. So this is very dangerous. This is a very dangerous situation that we're encountering in reference to how we articulate what we would do, what this symbolizes, what this means, because you are drawing a line in the sand and building on a platform that you may not even recognize that is not in your best interest. Now, Kareem, he's well read, he's well spoken, he's had the opportunity to hear what other people are saying and synthesize it. I recommend to the community that you do the same. You look at all the TikToks, you look at what people are saying, you hear what they're saying, the jokes notwithstanding, because they have value also. You put that in your tool chest, you mix it around before you bake the cookie, you read Kareem's article, and then you make an assessment for yourself and you teach from that assessment, because there's wrongs, there's moral wrongs, there's cultural wrongs, there's moral rights. It is a bunch of things. And I don't think not one person holds the true answer. You might find a lot of people aligned the same as far as their opinion is concerned, and you might accept some and you might reject others. But understand, what does that mean for the average guy, the average woman, the average comedian? That's where it's really hitting home.
No, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that this is an issue that requires a certain level of careful thought and consideration.
Maturity, a lot of maturity.
Oh, absolutely, maturity, absolute maturity. You have to look at this through some very clear lens. You have to analyze it
And
properly.
let me say one thing, and here's the proof in the pudding. I saw a TikTok or either on Facebook. Cedric Entertainer was doing a show, and he said, "All right, now I'm up here and I'm gonna say some jokes. Don't think you can come up here and slap me, because I slap back."
Reported
Right?
ahead.
So with that already being out there, and I think I told you this before, maybe there should be a moratorium as far as comedians are concerned. We're not even going to joke about that. We're going to dead that. That's dead to us. We're not even going to put it out there. We're not going to put any warnings out there. We're not even going to talk about it, because it's dead to us. It doesn't exist. Not that we don't want to talk about it, but we're not going to talk about it on the stage, because that's not really a conversation. That's just you joking at a fellow comedian's expense, something that you think is wrong, right? Like, Cedric the Entertainer didn't voice his opinion as to whether he thought that was right or wrong, but it shouldn't be fodder for jokes at this point, especially if you are a comedian. That's my suggestion. You want to do solidarity, you want to do a Brian Flores, you want to boycott and say, hey, look, I don't want to do these. Now's the time. Here it is. I don't see you at any marches. I don't see you at any protests. Here it is. Here's your time and space.
I mean, the bottom line here is I think where most people reach consensus is in the fact that no one feels that this is something that should have resulted in violence, or there shouldn't have been a resort to violence. Anytime you resort to violence, you are definitely lessening yourself as a human, especially within this context. Anything less than say you defending yourself from an imminent threat is considered, a use of violence that was unwarranted or unjustified. We've reached a point where any disagreement that we have, we should be able to resolve in a manner by which we engage in dialogue and speak to it and speak to our disagreement through actions other than violence, as you said, boycotts, as you said, non-attendance, as you said, writing or speaking to it. There were so many other alternatives, and we spend a lot of time teaching our young people about utilizing these alternatives before resorting to violence. You have young people dying on the streets every day for slights that are, say, they post something
It's
to each other on
inconsequential whether you
Instagram.
stepped on my sneakers or not. It's inconsequential. You know what I mean? Nobody cares if you got a little black mark on your sneaker or why you looking at me so hard.
And I was right. And that was back in
Right,
the day. You stepped
right,
on my sneaker. We about to fight now.
right.
Now, but now it's even. It's.
You look my way, you're
At
about to
least back
fight.
then, it was a touch. Now you put
You
something
look.
about somebody on Instagram, on
Yeah.
whatever it is, and now all of a sudden you're talking about me. When I see you, this is what I'm gonna do. And what happens next? What happens next after that? I mean, that's where the danger comes in all this, because we're trying to teach our young people to do better. And then to use this excuse that, well, I did this out of love, out of a character that I portrayed. Well, if we're going to talk about characters and we're going to talk about portrayals, let's talk about the joke. Let's talk about the joke. He talks about G.I. Jane 2. Did anybody watch G.I. Jane 1 and what that movie was about? It was
And
about this.
there's a level of narcissism here in that because Jada Pinkett spoke about her alopecia, what makes her think that the whole world was on her radar and knew about this? Right? I didn't know about it. I have my own life. So what makes you think Chris Rock knew about this, knew the sensitivity to it? Because you put it out there in the world. What makes you think the whole world is looking at it?
Well, you said it.
You're really grandizing yourself and thinking that somebody else picked up on your vibes.
The narcissism, I would say, is greater than that because you want to control the narrative. Okay, you decided that you were going to put this out to the world, right? You decide that you're going to sit damn near the front row, and understandably, because your husband has been nominated for this tremendous award. Now, if there's a commentary on what you put out there in the public sphere in a way that you don't like, now somebody gets the right on your behalf to exercise violence upon the person who isn't speaking about this the way you want them to talk about it. That's not right.
It's not. You will have to assume that that's in his brain, and the assumption that that's in his brain reverberates in the assumption that everybody's paying attention to you. Now, if you're so close and you're such a couple, and you're going to jump up and do all those things, I know. During COVID, they say stay away from 6 feet. But God, you see how they were sitting with one another? They were about 6 to 8 feet away from one another. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like,
oh, that's why he didn't notice that she was mad at first and he was laughing.
Right. So now you jumping up. But anyhow, I don't want to get too much on the culture.
Yeah, this is enough.
We just want to make sure that folks know that just because the victim does not want to go for it, when you have something self-evident as this, that doesn't mean that the law enforcement entities and bodies can't go for it and will not go for it.
Well,
not to mention a possible civil suit. We're not even talking about that.
Right.
So that's another option for Chris
and
Rock.
That's another layer as well. And that's why where the legal meets the culture, I know everyone is doing their commentary on all of what you shared and more, but just understanding what the possibilities are as this continues to play out in the court of public opinion, for sure. But in other news,
it could play out in the court of law.
Yes.
Or I could just play out in the court. If you want to meet me out there, homeboy, what you talking about? You know what I mean?
Well, in other news, because this definitely is going to dominate the news cycle for a while, but there are some things that you've been giving commentary on and that we want to circle back because the breaking news was the DeSantis law, and people are calling it the Don't Say Gay bill. So what does this mean?
Well, let me just say one thing about this before we move on. And Ed, you could take the floor and I'll come back and back you on some of the things or follow up. People are talking, but do people really know what the bill says? That's important. You got to start from what it says, right? And then you can go on and you can get catchy sayings like "don't say gay" or "less is more." So for those who are watching, I'm going to read just a little bit of the bill. And Ed, you'll take it after that. And then I'm just going to point out some of the gray areas that if you really using your critical thinking cap, this bill may not say a whole lot of anything. So it says, paraphrase, classroom instructions by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity, orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through third grade in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students with students in accordance with state standards. That's what the law says. I'll let you go from there, Ed. I'll come back and point out the gray areas because there is severe gray. And if you have your thinking cap on, you would say this might be much to do about nothing. I'll be quiet.
Well. You read the bill verbatim, and I think pretty much that that speaks to itself. In terms of why these are people are calling this the "Don't Say Gay" bill. Just to be fair, or rather not to be fair, just to be transparent and factual. The Governor DeSantis and the Republicans in that state, and I would imagine some Democrats this has actually been referred to as the Parental Rights and Education Bill. And it's
we can use that to our advantage. It's very important. We can use that to our advantage, that name and that title. But go ahead.
Yeah, and what this talks about, kind of, because this is about 4 lines in a larger bill. To be honest with you, one of the big dangers with this bill actually is that it requires the school to consult with parents in a rather extreme way as to the offering of any sort of mental, emotional, or physical health well-being services. Okay, so this is broad in that these people think that the proponents of this thing think, oh, this is great. They can't just talk to my kid about their gender or gender identity and the like, when in fact their kid may be having a heart attack, maybe suffering some sort of medical episode, and if that parent can't be contacted and hasn't previously given consent for the offering of services or for the seeking of services, your kid could be in danger. Because these folks, they want to make this seem as, in fact, the section of the law that they're looking to amend is called student welfare. So they're making it, of course, seem as if this is something that is having to do with the welfare of the student, the health of the student, the well-being of the student, and that parents have a right to decide what should be done with their kid, with their child, prior to the school deciding to do anything. The big question here is going to be whether, because see, even parents, it says parents, it doesn't say parent. What happens in that situation where there's some confusion amongst the staff as to, well, we contacted the mother, but what about the dad? And they aren't together and we can't reach him. Or he didn't sign that form at the beginning of the year for us to be able or allowed to deal with this situation.
Or they're divorced and separated.
Or let's say the kid that's living with the grandmother.
Right.
And the parents are in some rehab program. This is going to be very, very interesting in terms of its application. And the problem here is that school staff will err on the side of caution, quite frankly, because it gives like this right for that parent, if there's any issues here, to file suit, get an injunction, get damages, get payments of attorney's fees. So governmental employee. And also this is supposed to apply basically to public schools, because throughout it references school districts, but there are other places in this bill where it just talks about schools. So a lot of private institutions may say, hey, wait a minute, this may apply to us. This bill right here, is extremely interesting, and a lot of educators are very critical of this bill. I'm not sure if it was if it was clearly thought out. In my opinion, it's clearly part of this greater trend towards fascism, towards censorship, towards handcuffing the ability to have certain subjects discussed within the educational realm. I mean, this is not, this is not a good time in terms of some of what we're seeing legislatively.
Well, as a follow up to what you just mentioned, there is intentions and there's impact. The intention might be the Republican Party and conservatives to try to censor. The impact is something that they can't even imagine, right? Because the impact, you're saying that parents have the right to be involved, fully vested in what is taught to their kids. They have the right to say no. That's what they're basically saying. You have the right to say no. But now you have to understand the other side of that coin is that you have the right to say yes, that we want a course like cardiac arrest, how to handle unlawful police stops taught. What are you going to do with that? We want that taught. That's for the well-being of my son who can barely make it to school because he's being stopped, or my daughter. We want that taught. Now put that in the curriculum, right? Now it becomes less of a thought, more of a right, more of a basis for empowerment. And so you can tell me what you're not going to teach. I'm telling you what you need to teach in order to satisfy and ensure the well-being of my student, or geographically the students that I represent, because I'm in a school district, and you shouldn't be able to tell me no. Now, I started off with this whole thing before I digress, because you said some things, Ed, that I thought needed to be addressed, which was what I just said, that, is this much about nothing? Let me go to the section where it makes everything all gray. All right, we're talking about K to third grades. Get it. But here's the gray area. Critical thinking point. Teachable moment. In a manner that is not age appropriate. Who determines that? Who determines that the manner for which I teach something is not age appropriate? Where's the standard to that? I, teacher A, might teach something that is not appropriate. Ed, teacher B, might teach something that is appropriate. We're using two different methods, but we're teaching what we need to teach. That's the loophole. A manner that is not age appropriate. Who determines that? Who determines, part two, in a manner that is not developmentally appropriate? So now we got to get the psychiatrist and the psychologist on board. And I got to get on board, because the congressman and the congressperson doesn't know from a mental developing child what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what one child can handle and what another child can handle. Once again, slippery slope. We lawyers, ladies and gentlemen, we look at the construct of what is brought before us. Strict construction, loose construction, say what you mean what you say, plan your work your plan. You put something like this on my table, I'm cutting through it. Now, the other part, for students in accordance with the state standards. Now let's look at the state standards. Now, I'm blank heads. You could put the K and you could put the L's, and you may come up with knuckleheads, but I'll leave it up to you. Were they thinking about what is the state standard? Were they thinking about developmental appropriate for students, that we got to get psychiatrists, psychologists, we have to get social workers in here to develop that? Were they thinking about what's age appropriate, what I may do as far as a teaching method that's age appropriate versus what Ed may do that may be age appropriate? So there's a lot of gray in here.
Well, in terms of what you're talking about, it does say in Section 2 at the end of the bill that the Department of Education shall review and update as necessary school counseling frameworks and standards, education, K to practice.
And what that's doing is kicking the can down the road. You ain't got no A, B, C. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. What you got is, well, if this happens, well, we're going to look at it again. You're looking at case by case, developmental, day by day. No, people need standards. If you want something to really fly in this world, you need standards. You need conformity. You need four corners. What we say back in law school, the four corners of the document.
Yeah.
The four corners of the document. Don't you send me outside of the document.
And so the question becomes whether or not a challenge to this law in terms of the vagueness is going to be successful. I also want to read another little part of this bill. It says, at the beginning of the school year, each school district shall notify parents of each healthcare service offered at their student school and the option to withhold consent or decline any specific service. Okay? With every right and choice comes a responsibility, okay? And let's think about the situation where there is no consent or declination because, say, this is a kid that gets to that school and they can't get the parent to sign or file anything or otherwise provide this consent. These are all, these are I hope the citizens of Florida are really thinking about what it was that was just passed. Given the amount of people from New York, actually, that I've been running into, want to run down there because of the sunny.
They're all retirees. They don't have any kids.
I'm running into a lot of young folk that just, they just want to be down there, and then.
Well, that's great because once upon a time, North Carolina was one color, and then everybody transitioned down there, and it turned another color. It went from red to blue, blue to red. So that's what we need.
So it translated in a power shift?
Well, yeah, of course it was a power shift, and that's what's going to happen. Folks are going to move, and folks are going to live where they're going to live, and that's what's going to happen. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in New York City. Black folks all in urban areas. Now all of a sudden they get the idea that, let's go out to the suburbs. All the brownstones are taken. Now what you got, right? So, I mean, that's just a microcosm of what happens in this world. Look, I don't know how long the bill will be around. I mean, that's up to us and those who want to see it go away, but it's around.
Now I mentioned a little earlier, because I think this offers a segue into some discussion as to what's happening in schools right now, and in particular, what's happening with critical race theory.
And that's what I'm talking about. Parents being empowered to say, this is what we want you to teach.
Okay, right? Now, right now, there are certain people who don't want certain subjects to be taught. Okay, they don't want race to be discussed in schools.
They want diversity to be discussed, but they don't want race to be discussed. They want to talk about a better America, but they don't want to talk about oppression. They want to talk about nonviolence, but they don't want to talk about policing. There's a lot of things in that bag right there.
Now, before I go into some of these, for instance, audience, there's a bill right now that was offered into the New York State Assembly on December 13th, 2021 by a Representative Salk. I believe he's a Republican, to amend the educational law. And it says, courses of study in critical race theory. No teacher, administrator, or other employee of a school district, charter school, or city school district shall require or make part of a course the following concepts. One race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. An individual should be discriminated. What?
Yeah, I said, say what? No, keep going. I'm like, what? The what?
Yeah, that's what this is saying. Oh, friends, let me read you this one. An individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. How about this one? Any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex.
So time out. So we're teaching about the Revolutionary War. We're teaching about slavery. I would imagine that there may be some white students in a classroom that feel really bad because this is what they find out their ancestors have done. Yeah. You're telling me, you know what? We can't talk about that because that student is feeling really bad. Now, just for our audience to understand, I simplified that. It's bigger than that. But this has been going on since 1970s, right? Critical race theory has been around for a very, very long time. And once again, I just want to read definition and framework, right? They call it CRT, critical race theory framework, and or analytical tool primarily used in colleges and universities in the 1970s, a tool for students to think critically about race, history, oppression, diversity. It goes on. And what you're saying is that we want to, not what you're saying, Ed, but what the law is saying, that we want to wipe that off the table because at any particular moment, any particular group or person or individual will feel a certain way. So now, knowing that we were doing this show, I said, oh, let me just see. I know what New York is about, but I knew you were going to talk about that. Well, let me see what Jersey says. Jersey says that, look, critical race theory is not required in New Jersey. You do what you want. What is mandatory, what is required, which I find it very, very peculiar, because what are we really talking about if you're really delving into the subject matter the way it should be delved into? Diversity and inclusion. If you're talking about diversity and inclusion, you can't start with 2022. You have to start when there wasn't diversity and there wasn't inclusion in 1865, 1901, 1922, 1950, the Great Depression. You keep on going. And how is that not teaching or having elements of critical race theory and critical thinking? And who's the laborers and who was the workers and who were the decision makers? So, where women place themselves and was placed when it comes down to World War I, World War II, manning the factories, doing things of that nature. Come on, what are we talking about here? What are we really talking about
here? And listen, and one of the other things that I thought about when I was reading this is, let's say for instance that the student is Turkish, from Turkey, and you're talking about the Armenian Holocaust. Let's say the student is German and we're talking about the Jewish Holocaust.
Right. Native American, and we just talking about Christopher Columbus.
So just because I'm talking about this, now it falls within this, that any sort of anguish or discomfort or the idea of that is, when I look at this stuff, I think about a book. It's called Fahrenheit 451. The author of that book is Ray Bradbury. Old book. Okay, it's about the burning of books, the burning of knowledge, people not wanting other people to get certain information because they feel it's gonna, poison their mind or cause them to some sort of anguish or discomfort. The bottom line is that we have to move away from the idea that we have to protect people from facts, that we have to protect people from history. If something happened and it's affecting what's happening today, because quite frankly, the past affects the present, okay? If it affects the present. When you ask people, where do you come from? Who are your parents? Where did they come from? You're naturally asking someone about their history, okay? And why do you do that? You do that because you understand that where you come from influences where you're at now.
Oh, put a pin on that, Ed. Put a pin on that real quickly. I share your thought, but I want to share the other side real quick. The other side is that maybe we lost our way, in particular, our way, you and our way, me and you as a race, in that when it wasn't taught in schools, and we know it was going to never be taught in schools, we taught it at home. And we made sure you read the books that you needed to read, and you need to do certain things. Now that's
not
cultural.
Everybody. That's not everybody.
Look, look, everything ain't for everybody. But what I am saying is that there has been, and whether you accept it or not, there's been a lowering of the guards in families in general. Go across the social economic ladder, that it'll be taken care of by someone else. They can find it on the internet.
Hey, Royce, I got an oldie but goodie for you.
Tell me, brother.
Remember Golden Legacy? Remember Golden Legacy comics?
Oh, yes. See? Yes, exactly.
That's where I got my Black history. Now, what is Golden Legacy comics? There were these comic books back in the day that would profile heroes in Black history and sheroes in Black history, quite frankly.
That's right.
In an, drawn out, animated. just like your regular
They had the
Marvel
Civil War. They
DC
did the Civil. They did the
comics.
Civil War and everything. Yes.
Yeah, they would
Yes.
do one
Yes.
issue would be Frederick Douglass, another
Right.
one would be Christmas Addicts, another one would be Harriet Tubman, and I would read through these, and that was my Black History. You know what else was my Black History? Remember those beautiful posters that Budweiser would have?
Yeah.
Of African emperors and empresses.
Long posters. It wasn't like real long. Yes.
And they were beautiful too.
Yes. Yes. But what I mean, all the point I'm saying is that I'm here, I'm fighting, I understand. But the little corner, a little section of me says, you know what? I don't have to show you how to defend for yourself. I don't have to let somebody else show you. Like if I can't play basketball, I'm gonna still try to show my son how to play basketball. I'm just not gonna farm him out. If I don't know how to fight, which is not the truth, but if I don't know how to fight, I ain't gonna farm him out to show him how to fight. I mean, there's something that's in-house that you need to take care of in-house, and you can't depend on nobody else to do it. Nobody else. And then there's something to be said for empowerment, because I think one side of the coin talks about, oh, we don't want anybody to feel bad, mad, sad, or disenfranchised. And I think what you and I have discussed off the air, which I'll bring on the air, this is about empowerment and making sure that you're not empowered. Because if you know your history, then you are empowered. And like anything else, if you're prepared for it, you can see it coming. Right? You can see it coming. You can see that, oh yeah, now a certain group of people are now moving back into Harlem, and now the schools are now getting better, and the police are more around, and there's less graffiti, and the druggies are now being pushed down to Midtown, and they're no longer where they used to be. Why is that? If you don't know your history, you don't know why, right? So it's about empowerment and making sure that you're not empowered.
And just to circle back, the reason why we talking about this on this show is because, as I stated, there is a bill in the New York legislature on this. I have a second,
right now that's going to be going down while we sleeping.
And I have a second bill, because it's not just one bill. There may be more than just these two. This other one says the regents and school districts in the state of New York shall not establish or permit a course or curriculum that teaches individuals to bear collective responsibility for any actions committed previously by other members of the same race. I mean,
what are you talking about?
I mean, these right now, whether they get passed or not is a whole nother question, right?
No. That is the question, because in order for things to become a reality, you have to start talking about it.
Yeah. So, but all I'm saying is that somebody may say, "Oh, Ed, those laws aren't going to pass. Those bills aren't going to pass." And you may be right, okay? You may be right. But I would say this, and this is what I believe my co-host is pointing to. I used to work in the legislature, and there's a history, there's a database with all these bills, and there's a history section, and it talks about how many times the bill was introduced in successive years and sessions.
Right. That's
So a lot of these bills that are ultimately passed started their lives many years before and kept getting reintroduced until eventually the power dynamic changed and somebody else was in power. And it's sitting there, and they look at it and they say, man, we need to pass this now. Now's the right time. And so anytime these bills are introduced, they're always dangerous, because that means that somebody is working on this. Somebody has actually taken the energy to put this together and to introduce it, and to try to get into committee, and to try to eventually get it onto the floor of the legislature and eventually get it signed.
And now the positive side of that is, at least what you and I in our practice, is that we've watched this with discovery. The exchanging of information when you're defending someone, right? How quickly can a district attorney's office get you that material so you can defend your client? That bill was on the floor many times. Many times. Once you speak it into the air, that is the incremental step for it to become reality, because then people just build on it. And then the right time, right place, and now here you have bail reform. Now you have discovery reform. There's a positive to that, and the negative is what we're speaking to, these bills right here.
And what I'm gonna close by saying this on this subject right now, where I see a lot of the activity with respect to this is happening in local school boards and local legislators on the county and municipal level. So while some of these folks may not right now be successful in the state level, their attacks are seeming to get more traction on local levels in these practically all white or very small minority number
I would
suburban
change. I would
communities.
change one word. Not even attacks. Their achievements, because they're achieving this. It's not even an attack. They're getting it
Well,
slowly but surely.
well, they're getting a few victories out there. I think right now the victories are in getting certain people onto certain school boards, which is usually kind of the start of a lot of people's careers, right? The first office that they hold is that local school board because they happen to be a parent in that community and they decide, okay, I'm gonna run for the local school board. I only have to get this amount of votes, or the local library. All of this has a genesis and a start and a building point. And so we preach vigilance on this show. We're asking the audience pay attention, be concerned, be alert. This is how it starts. And this is what's going on right now.
And I would tell you to add on to that. And Dr. Grant knows this, and you know this, Ed, when I do the presentations, when it comes down to the book,
Absolutely.
look, don't be a victim. If you don't want to be a victim, just do the things that a victim would make ensure that happens so you won't be a victim. You got to vote, you got to intervene, you got to communicate, tolerate, infiltrate, and make a difference. You do those things, and we ain't got to worry about a county doing something. You take any one of those branches, we ain't got to worry about that. Intervene, infiltrate, become a member of the school board, become a volunteer parent and make sure, go to the district meetings, make a difference, have your voice heard, be tolerable and have teachable moments to understand what's going on around you. And you vote, you do those things and we stomp out. We'll stomp it right on out. You got to do those things.
Got to.
Absolutely. Well said. Well said. Well, there's so much more dialogue on this, but thank you for raising those points. And we do have one more piece of news that we wanted to circle back on. We talked about in the show previously, and just wanted to share what we see unfolding when it comes to New York City correction. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, gentlemen.
Well, here it is.
Well,
Less is more. And so now the time has come where, we talked about early on how people that were on parole, they were being violated for minor infractions, infractions that shouldn't land you back in jail and have you wait 6 to 8 months before you actually have your hearing. Well, now the proof is in the pudding. Folks are going to be released. They're going to be set back out into society. And I'll let you give them the big bonus of what this all means. Hopefully, they're able to make it within the mainstream. But what is most important of all this is what, Ed?
Well, if you recall, audience, some months back we talked about the less is more bill that was signed by Governor Hochul. Well, this month of March was when it was the effective date of it, which it was when it was implemented. And I'll remind the audience that this had to do with individuals on parole and them receiving credit for time that they had previously done, and also credit for time periods during which they were not in violation, in order to bring about a more hastened or a quicker date for them to be off of parole. And as my co-host mentioned, you also have this issue of people being incarcerated for minor violations. And what this bill does is it basically prescribes certain amount of day punishments for certain infractions. So you're not sitting there for 6 to 8 months for some weed or associating with a felon and the like. Okay. It prescribes a more measured response to certain otherwise minor violations. It also gives credits for, as I mentioned, time served and so forth. The big bonus here is the number is 8,000, right? And let me just mention that the Legal Aid Society of New York had to file a writ of habeas corpus in order to force the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision to properly follow the law as written, because they saw that a lot of the measures that had to be taken in order to be ready for the implementation bill had not been taken, in terms of due process. Because the big here is due process. What I mean by due process, a hearing, a quicker hearing, hearings that no longer take place, some hearings that no longer take place in the jail, but instead in the courts. And what happens in these courts? You get better due process. You get, you're there in court with the judge. It's more robust in terms of the review of the facts, the evidence that's presented in support of it, because they also dealt with the standards and the burdens of proof as well in this bill. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I welcome you to look at it. And if you have somebody that's on parole, a family member, or yourself, please look at this. One of the things here, the big takeaway here for me is that discharge from parole. What does that mean? If you're no longer on parole, that means your voting rights are restored. Now, you may have had them if it wasn't a felony conviction, but for those with the felony conviction, did time in prison and on parole, they didn't have voting rights. But once you get discharged from parole, you're no longer under supervision, your voting rights are restored. And that's a biggie, right? Because
that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate.
You got this huge community of people who are disenfranchised, either for real or de facto, in that they have been trained to believe that their voting rights cannot be restored, that once a felon, no vote. A lot of times when I talk to felons and I say, hey, yo, did you vote? Now I'm a felon. But wait a minute. Are you still on parole? Are you still on supervision? No, that ended years ago. You can vote. Now, this is the key here, and this is what I want to inform the audience.
And look, and I've had the experience that happened in Philadelphia too as well. So, I mean, it's nationwide.
Under Correction Law 75, actually, DOCS, the Department of Corrections, is supposed to actively inform that person who's being released from parole that they now have a right to vote. And so the question is that happening? Is that going to be happening under, with the implementation of this law? And that remains to be seen. But as my co-host Royce was talking about earlier, with respect to the critical race theory, we have to be willing, ready, and able to start empowering ourselves. So even if the department doesn't do their job under Correctional Law Section 75, we need to be more active in informing members of our community of their rights and letting them know that, hey, listen, you got a right to, if you were released from parole, if you're discharged from parole, you now have a right to vote if you're no longer under supervision. And that's something that we have to do to empower ourselves.
I'm going to suggest the best way we do that and the best way people become informed is to stay tuned and stay close to us.
That's right.
Just stay close to us. Stay with your best friends. We got you covered like a blanket, all day, every day. You said spring is eternal, right? That's what you said, right? Well,
it's hope. Hope springs eternal.
Hope springs eternal. I want to tell you that the folks at Speaking Legally, we're nocturnal. We stay up all day. All right, we stay up all day just to provide the information to you. So that's our job. So take that and take it in good health, and we'll see you on the rebound, because it's time to disappear.
It is great show, great dialogue, great information. Thank you for tuning in. Those who are here live, catching the replay, #replay when you put your comments, and we'll be back again next week, same time, same place. Stay well and be safe, everyone.
All right, take care.